is they're actually hindering their recovery, right? Because we just talked about how important post-workout is. But then what's happening is they're setting themselves up for failure later on.
Hello and welcome to the Eat More Carbs podcast. I'm Jenna Fisher here with my co-host Riley Beatty, and today we are going to be talking about all things post-workout because we've had a lot of questions recently about what to use after your workout to refuel, what's a good post-workout meal. So all questions post-workout are going to be answered in this episode. Before we get into your questions, we'll start with our high and low segment. I'll kick us off today. My low from the week is that I've actually acclimated to the warm temperature in Arizona. When we go walking in the morning, I now need a jacket even though it's still like 72 degrees. So I think my body is like changing, and now I'm gonna go like back to Colorado for Christmas or something like that, and it's gonna feel like the Arctic tundra for me. My high from the week is that I've been working with a client who's working on period recovery, and this client got their period for the second time, and this is just such a huge win for this client. I'm so excited, I'm so happy. So that's definitely my high from the week. What about you, Riley? High and low?
Oh my gosh, that was such a great high. You know that we love periods here. So I'll start off with my low as well. As I've mentioned before on the podcast, I have been teaching at the College of Charleston this semester. It's actually kind of sad that as we're in November, we only have a couple of weeks left of class. I don't know if they think that this is necessarily a low, but it's been so fun to educate and work with all these college kids. I've been on a college campus a lot as a sports dietitian, but it's been fun to be back in a different role. So I'm kind of sad that that's ending in the next couple of weeks. But kind of building off of that, we do have a lot of education that we've been working on in the back end at RBSN. As you know, we've been hard at work for the last couple of months, and we are going to be officially opening up our membership to the public. Super exciting at the beginning of January. So kind of continuing to build educational content and be able to provide science-backed resources is something that we're really, really excited about. So that's definitely a high of the week, might be a high of the last couple of months. So really excited about that. And like you've mentioned, Jenna, there's so many questions about post-workout fueling that we're getting, and that's going to be a big part of the membership. And also that's why we wanted to kind of dive into that post-workout fueling today. Because I know that when I work with athletes, one of the first things that we do is we look at what's happening before and after training. I feel like that's one of the easiest and fastest ways to see some benefits from performance nutrition. So I'm super excited to talk even more about that today.
I'm so excited to talk more about post-workout and recovery fueling and all of that good stuff. I'm also thrilled that that's your high this week. I feel like it's been a long time coming that we've kind of behind the scenes had this high that we've kind of been keeping a secret. So it's so exciting that that's finally out there. And I'm so excited for January and for everybody to kind of get on board and see all that content and have access to all of those nutrition resources come the new year. So super exciting. But like you said, we're going to talk a lot about post-workout things today. So question, why is post-workout important? What is post-workout fueling? Like overview.
First off, post-workout fueling is one of the things that gets overlooked often by athletes. A lot of the time, athletes are so focused on what do I need to eat, before my run? What do I need to eat before my practice so I feel energized, so I don't have bloating? And they think the job is done after they have completed their activity. That is a huge mistake that I'm seeing athletes make, because you need post-workout fuel to help start the recovery process, right? We need it to help rebuild lean muscle tissue, to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and then also to replenish those glycogen stores. This is super important, especially for athletes with short recovery time. So if you have, less than 8 hours between your training sessions, making sure that you are maximizing this period of time, super important. Additionally though, right, like even if you are, an active adult, if you're an active woman, this period is also so important for helping to, start stimulating that muscle protein synthesis and to build that lean muscle that we're all trying to go for.
Just like you mentioned, I think it's really important to highlight that, yes, it's very important for an athlete to have that post-workout meal. But if you are just an active person, you live an active lifestyle, it's still really important, especially if we're thinking about what are our performance goals in the gym. Do we want to put on muscle? Do we want to recover well? Like those types of things, definitely still important to have that post-workout meal.
I think something that we forget about post-workout is that even if we, are not an elite level athlete or somebody that has a really quick, recovery period, quick turnaround between training sessions, usually we need to eat a meal anyways because we haven't ate in, 4 to 5 hours, right? If you eat your pre-practice, your pre-run meal, a couple hours before, you have a 2-hour training session, you haven't ate in 4 to 5 hours. And even if you weren't an athlete or an active person, you need to be eating every 4 to 5 hours. So I think there is a sometimes misconception on like the why behind a post-workout meal.
Speaking of misconceptions, when we say like post-workout meal too, we don't necessarily mean that you need to like slam a protein shake. I feel like that's something that I always see or get questions about is like, should I bring a protein shake with me? Should I have that right away? And truthfully, most of the time when that question is being asked, it's like a protein powder in a water. There's nothing else to it. And one of the things that you say all the time is we want a 3-to-1 carb to protein ratio. But what does that mean, especially for an athlete, and why is that important?
So a 3-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein is kind of like the general recommendation that is in the sports nutrition world for athletes to make sure that they're maximizing muscle protein synthesis, but then also making sure that they're replenishing their glycogen stores. This ratio can be very individualized to athletes. So when we look at that ratio, right, 3-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein means for every 1 gram of protein that you're eating, you should be eating 3 grams of carbohydrates. So the easiest way to kind of figure this out is to take body weight and to calculate how much protein you need based off of your body weight, and then multiply that by 3 to get the amount of carbohydrates that you need. If you're somebody that needs 20 grams of protein after your workout, that means you need 60 grams of carbohydrates.
And just to clarify, if you were to calculate your total amount of protein needs, it's not that we would multiply the total amount of protein needs that you need in a day by 3 in order to get the amount of carbohydrates you need. It's for the specific after workout recommendation of 3-to-1 in that ratio of grams to protein to grams of carbohydrate.
Exactly. So to calculate that like post-workout protein need, generally the literature is saying 0.24 to 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So for most people, that's probably going to round to about 20 grams of protein. So that's kind of why that general guideline is out there. So yes, just like Jenna said, not your entire day. Please don't do that. Just for this specific refueling period of time.
Which I think was why we get that 20 grams within 20 minutes, right? Like that was kind of the thing for a long period of time with 20 grams of protein within 20 minutes. And yeah, it's a good kind of rule of thumb, but we also need to make sure that we have carbohydrate in there. Even for active women or active adults, it's still important to get some carbohydrate in there. However, based on your individual needs, what type of workout you're doing, how often you're training, and things like that, you might need something that's closer to a 2-to-1 carb to protein ratio because we aren't high level athletes. Maybe we were back in the day, but that's that transition out of being a high level athlete to just being an active person, those small adjustments, but carbs are still super important.
So what's a common post-workout like option that you provide to your clients?
In all honesty, most of the time that I'm working with a client, they work out either in the morning or in the evening, and maybe sometimes around lunchtime because we're working around a work schedule or something like that. Oftentimes post-workout is actually a full meal. Maybe it's dinner time or maybe it's breakfast time. So we really want to make sure that we're prioritizing using some type of a plate method in order to ensure we have protein on that plate and carbohydrates on that plate. It just might be in a higher amount than what we would see throughout the rest of the day. So if you're familiar with the plate method, maybe we're using an active day plate post-workout, but then the remainder of the day we might be using a different distribution of our color to our protein to our carbohydrate.
I love that, right? I think a lot of the time we think that we have to have, a really fancy like post-workout shake and have to have all these sport products or we have to have this crazy fueling timeline, but having a great meal, 1 to 2 hours after a training session is a wonderful way to hit this ratio, whether it's 2-to-1, 3-to-1. Hey, I work with some athletes that were at 4-to-1 carbs to protein. So having that meal is just an easy way to incorporate those carbs and those proteins.
I love that you bring up that it's even variable for athletes, right? Like you have some that are going to need a higher amount of carbohydrate post-workout. So even though I said yes, for a lot of active people, we might not need as much carbohydrate, you still might depending on your training schedule, right? Like for example, if you're someone who's training for a long distance marathon or something like that, like you have a higher energy output, you're training for long periods of time, your amount of carbohydrate that you need might still be higher. So it's not like this is a recommendation that if you're not a high level athlete or anything like that, that would be incorrect for you.
So one of the big things that I struggled with when I was playing was I had a fear about post-workout carbs and post-workout proteins. What happened was I was so scared of like gaining muscle, of getting bulky, all that stuff. And in my brain, I was thinking, okay, if I skip my post-workout fueling, then I'll prevent these things from happening. I see this all the time with athletes that I work with now. I see them making the same mistake. And what's actually happening is they're actually hindering their recovery, right? Because we just talked about how important post-workout is. But then what's happening is they're setting themselves up for failure later on. Because one of the biggest things that I see with athletes who are skipping their post-workout fueling is overconsumption, overfueling, binging later on because their body needs to catch up and because they have this restriction around their workouts. I don't know if you're seeing this with your clients, but I see this all the time with my athletes.
Oh, 100%. Totally valid to feel some type of fear potentially around change in our body size. And we often associate that with eating something right after we've had maybe a hard workout. But the longer that we tell ourselves we can't have any type of fuel, the more likely we are to binge or overeat later.
And I think one of the biggest things that I see athletes craving is like carbohydrates later when they're not eating them after their workout.
Yep. At that point, they maybe overconsume the carbohydrates that they're maybe craving, and they might miss out on some of the other components that we would encourage someone to have in a post-workout snack, a post-workout meal, because they have waited such a long time. When you wait a long period of time after your workout or after your training to fuel your body afterwards, the longer you go, the more likely you are to allow yourself then to consume things that maybe aren't supporting your goals. Because we walk into our house and we just reach for the bag of chips, we reach for the bag of crackers, whatever it is, and we just start to consume that just to fill that energy void that we have. We just want to feel better again. We want to bring our blood sugar up because we've gone such a long period of time without any type of recovery. And I just want to say, like, this is so valid. And I've been there too. Like, this happened to me last weekend. I'm a dietitian and I know that I should eat something after a workout and I should be refueling on the other side of my workout. But I'll tell this story because I want everybody to know that, like, it's common and it happens to everybody. But after my workout on Sunday, I always do leg day on Sunday. Sunday's typically a high energy output day for me at the gym. I'm there a little bit longer. After my workout, instead of going home and cooking dinner like I typically do, I had a couple errands that I needed to run. And I told myself, it's fine. It's just a few errands. I'll go and do that. Of course, when that happens, that always takes a little bit longer than you think it's going to. And then my husband was like, oh, we forgot this. We had to leave the house again. All of a sudden, we went an extended period of time without any type of fuel afterwards. Then it was to the point where I was very hangry. And so my husband was like, we'll just go and get food somewhere. And I was like, perfect. And we went to Illegal Pete's. I don't know if you're familiar with what Illegal Pete's is, but essentially it's local Qdoba Chipotle. They started in Colorado, big shout out. And there's one location here in Arizona. So I was very excited to go large burrito style. And I sat down. Usually I get like a kid-sized burrito. I get something on the side. I can balance my plate that way. But in this instance, I was so hungry, I convinced myself that I needed like the adult size burrito. And I packed that thing full, and then we sat down and I ate almost the entire thing. And it wasn't until the very end of consuming that my brain started to go, we're overeating right now. Like, I had the amount of volume that my stomach could handle and potentially maybe the amount of calories that my body needed at that time, because I was so hungry from waiting such a long time after I had exercised in order to refuel afterwards. And then of course, we come home later, I'm complaining that my stomach hurts, all because I waited such a long time to refuel my body after my workout, and I put myself into this situation. So even myself, I recognize that that's a pattern that we want to try to avoid as often as possible, but it's something that does happen. It's just, how can we avoid that? What processes should I have put in place? What changes should I have made in order to make sure that, like, I went to Illegal Pete's, and it's fine to go to Illegal Pete's, but maybe I'd gone in a better space so that way I didn't overeat or overconsume for that moment. Nothing wrong with an adult-sized burrito for sure, but did I need all of that for my goals, my energy needs in that moment? The answer is no.
I think that's such a powerful story. I mean, we're dietitians, but we're people too, right? And sometimes we have fueling like barriers and things like that come up. but because of our training and what we do with our clients is we help people navigate that, right? So we can help ourselves navigate that. I really appreciate that you shared that. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, of course. Half of the time that I'm sharing my workaround or my small tips with clients, it's things that I have done, like actual practices in my life. Like I know that I need to go grocery shopping earlier on Sunday because I know that I'm going to have a longer workout on Sunday afternoon. Things like that we help clients work through, those timelines, those schedules of fueling and putting things in there so we can have confidence about our fueling when we need it because it's super individualized.
Super individualized. So for those athletes that you and clients that you work with, helping them kind of navigate that like post workout timeline to not just help them feel confident and help them build, new lean muscle mass, help them meet their body composition goals, but setting them up for success throughout the day. What are some maybe tips that you have for somebody who might be listening to this, might be nervous to add some of these post workout suggestions in?
I think this is, even though we were pass on this in a previous Smash or Pass episode, but like having kind of a girl dinner plan, realizing that it doesn't need to be something super fancy, but we can use the outlines of performance plates in order to create a plan. And that's like an outline that we have. But walking into a day with a plan of when I'm exercising and what we're going to have around exercise is a great place to start. Kind of like you mentioned right at the beginning of this, like tackling pre and post workout are a great place to start when it comes to maybe changing your fueling and your intake. We can start small. It doesn't need to be something elaborate or huge or something like that. If you're someone who's used to going a long period of time without fueling after your workout, like let's start with something very small, very minimal, that's maybe, an hour outside of when we finish exercising that incorporates both protein and carbohydrate, and then we kind of build from there.
I love it. One of the things that individuals are, trying to accomplish when they are working out is building lean muscle mass, right? Maintaining lean muscle mass to help reach their body composition goals, to help with power endurance. So we talked a lot about like making sure that we're having something post-workout wise. After, the couple of hours post-workout, does it really matter what we're doing after that post-workout meal for, building lean muscle for body composition? Does it matter, or is the post-workout meal like all we're really worried about?
We should be mindful of what we are choosing to fuel our body with beyond just a post-workout meal. I think one of the things that you say a lot, which I think can be carried not just from an athletic population, but for an active population, is that like you're practicing your fueling all the time. Just like when you go to practice for your sporting event, you also have to practice your fueling. Like what we put into our body does impact what happens to us.
Yeah. And I think too, especially for those athletes or individuals who are trying to build like lean muscle mass, dosing your protein throughout the day with the performance plates like Jenna talked about is the way to do that. One of the biggest mistakes that I see with athletes who are trying to build muscle, get stronger, is they're so focused on that post-workout meal, that post-workout protein, that they're not worrying about what is happening throughout the day. And when you look at the research and when you look at the results that our clients have gotten, it's more about dosing that protein throughout the day. So you shouldn't have 5 grams of protein at breakfast and 40 grams of protein after your post-workout. We need to make that consistent across the day and try to make it as even as possible.
And not only protein too, but carbohydrates. I think we see this a lot is, again, because we grew up in an era where maybe carbohydrates were something that we were told we shouldn't consume for whatever reason. But we often see people that are drastically over consuming protein and not consuming enough carbohydrate, or counting things that are like fruits and vegetables as their carbohydrate and thinking that that's going to help them build muscle. But carbohydrate is an important part of also growing muscle mass.
We're not talking about enough that carbohydrate has a protein sparing effect. So if we're not consuming enough carbohydrate, we're not going to be utilizing that protein as efficiently as we can to build and maintain muscle mass. See this all the time. And I also hear this from all the other dietitians too. Like so many people are like reaching out and like, I know why your podcast is called Eat More Carbs, because nobody's eating enough carbohydrates, because nobody in the athletic world is eating enough carbs.
I think that it's definitely a big thing that we see both with clients that we work with who are maybe athletes and active people. Both are generally not consuming enough carbohydrate. and maybe over consuming another macronutrient. I find very, very often that it's protein. And I think that the reason why is we do have that mentality of like protein has a high thermic effect. It doesn't have sugar in it, things like that, that people kind of associate with the reason why protein would be something that we did want to consume in excess. I even remember having conversations with you back in the internship with like that law of diminishing returns, right? Like if you sit down with a meal and it has an incredibly high amount of protein in it, at a certain point, your body is going to recognize that it can't utilize that protein anymore, which kind of goes back to why we want to space out our intake, make sure that it's throughout the day versus bulking it all at one time. If you have a protein goal that you're trying to hit, or a carbohydrate goal for that matter, it's not the best approach to all of a sudden at the very end of the day, like say, oh, I know I'm behind on this, so I'm just going to have like a ton of protein right now, or just a ton of carbohydrate.
Doesn't work like that. Sorry. That would be too easy.
If it worked like that, we would only eat one meal a day and it would only be protein in the evening.
Don't give anybody that idea. That is not advice.
No. But it doesn't work like that.
We talked a lot about like post-workout, like especially after like a training session or things like that. What about like after a home training session? Something that we're going to be seeing a lot of in the next couple of months is like home training sessions. People are going to be visiting family. They're going to be going home. They're going to be visiting friends. So their workout schedules might look a little bit different. And something that I'm seeing often is people don't realize how active they are, how hard their workouts are. So how do you help clients kind of navigate this post-workout fueling during the holiday season?
First of all, if you are traveling and you keep up with your movement, like fantastic. But if you are traveling and movement does not look the same, that's okay. Like there's different seasons of life where we might be more active than others, and there's nothing wrong with that. That being said, if you are remaining more active when you are at home doing some home workouts, maybe you get like the Apple Fitness classes so you can do them at home. Movement is movement, and we still need to fuel our bodies in order to move. We've talked about before, like hiking becomes your active day, and you still need to make sure that you're fueling for that. It's still important to fuel your body no matter where you're choosing to be active.
And I think, like you mentioned, making sure that we're having that post-workout meal to set ourselves up for success later on. So even if it's, Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever holiday that you celebrate, it's not working out super hard in the morning and then trying to deprive yourself all day so that you can have a huge holiday meal. It doesn't work like that, right? You still trained hard. You need to refuel in preparation for that meal later, setting yourself up for success with boundaries, for listening to your hunger and fullness cues, and then still also, right, having that post-workout snack or meal or fuel will help you with your body composition goals.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I always like to kind of walk through with clients when they're going home or they're traveling or their exercise looks a little different is I ask them what advice they would give me if the roles were reversed, right? Would you tell me, even as a friend, to decrease my intake leading up to Thanksgiving dinner? If you do Thanksgiving dinner, maybe you do Thanksgiving brunch. Like you wouldn't give that advice to your friend to, not consume energy leading up to that. Like we still need to fuel our bodies throughout the day leading up to a holiday meal.
If you told me that, we just wouldn't be friends.
Right? Yeah. I'd be like, no, breakfast is my favorite meal, so it's not going to happen. So kind of going over some of the things that we talked about today, making sure that you have some type of post-workout fuel can really impact what's going on behind the scenes. We need to make sure that we have protein and carbohydrate in order to help you reach your goals. When it comes to holiday fueling, we shouldn't deprive ourselves leading up to any type of a holiday dinner or a holiday event. Even dietitians have been through that, and we know how important it can be to make sure that we fuel on the other side of a workout, no matter if that workout is done in your home gym, it's done in your mom's basement, or it's done on the practice field. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Eat More Carbs podcast. If you have questions for Riley and I, please make sure that you leave them in the comments, or you can DM us on Instagram. We're at the Eat More Carbs podcast. I am at Jenna Fisher Nutrition, and you can find Riley at Riley Beatty Nutrition. As always, make sure to rate, subscribe, and review, and remember to eat more carbs.